I honestly believe over the next 12 to 36 months or so, we're going to see drastic changes in monetary policy. Listen, we need Trump to get in office and we need to understand what his plan is, but he's even hinted at having some oversight and control over the Federal Reserve. If the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve is signed and put in place, I think this would be the biggest US economic announcement since Nixon in 71. My message to the public is this: they're realizing the loss for those that are holding and storing and saving in dollars. We're going to live through the biggest asset bubble in human history because we have to. I think the amount of money printing will exceed COVID, and this is all just math.
Kitco News Outlook 2025 is brought to you by Matador.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Kitco News. I'm Jeremy Szafron. Well, what's next for Bitcoin? After smashing through the six-figure mark for the first time ever and topping the psychological $100,000 level, Bitcoin has been a little volatile here, but is this the new record high or is it a ceiling for the price? As ARK Invest CEO Cathie Wood puts it, is it just the first innings for Bitcoin? To help us understand this historic moment and how to prepare for the road ahead in 2025, we're joined by Jack Mallers, the founder and CEO of Strike, the global Bitcoin app revolutionizing financial payments. Jack was one of the pioneering developers over at Bitcoin's Lightning Network. It was named to Forbes 30 under 30 list back in 2019. And the last time you were on the show, my friend, you said that Bitcoin would be at $100,000 by the end of the year. Well, here we are. Jack, welcome. Nice to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me. Would you look at that? What a time to be alive. I'm a huge fan, as you guys know, so it's always an honor.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you coming on because that was a good call. You know, you were keeping it moderate. You weren't calling for $500,000 by the end of this year. And here we are sitting here. I mean, the latest Bitcoin price surge comes amid major headlines, as you know. I mean, President-elect Donald Trump has named venture capitalist David Sachs as the White House's new artificial intelligence and cryptocurrency czar. The appointment marks another key role for Musk's confidant in the new administration, as Sachs is a former PayPal executive who worked alongside Elon during the company's early days. And Trump also announced that the nomination of cryptocurrency advocate Paul Atkins is the next chair of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. And as you may have heard this, Jack, in a rare comment, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell has likened Bitcoin to gold, a striking acknowledgement from the world's most influential central banker. Since Trump's victory in the U.S. presidential election on November 5th, Bitcoin has skyrocketed, climbing from just under $70,000 to that all-time high above 103. That's a staggering 50% jump in just 1 month. Year to date, Bitcoin has soared 132%, still trading above that $100,000 mark. And I know this is a lot, but we got to get it in here. As we add to the momentum, Bitcoin's market cap has reached $1.9 trillion, marking it the world's 10th largest currency by market cap, surpassing the Australian dollar. So let's get into it here. First, let's get your reaction to this historic 100,000 level. What got us here? What do you think, Jack?
Yeah, listen, I think Bitcoin continues to be the best performing asset in the history of mankind, the best performing asset over the last 15 years, and the best performing asset right now for a very simple concept, but it's profound, is that it's the scarcest, it's the hardest. And when people say Bitcoin's hard, they're referencing how hard it is to make more. That's the key term and the key phrase. And what's really interesting to understand is traditionally in markets, with more demand comes more supply. Meaning, if everyone in the world wanted an iPhone, Apple will increase the iPhone supply and make sure everyone in the world becomes a customer. If everyone in the world wants McDonald's cheeseburger, McDonald's will increase the supply of cheeseburgers and meet the market demand. Now, if everyone in the world wants a Bitcoin, it's actually the only thing that you can own where we can't make any more, where we cannot increase the supply. And for that very reason, Bitcoin demands a higher price. New supply comes from the market. New supply comes from those that have it. More demand demands a higher price. And it's the scarcest and it's the hardest to make more of. In fact, it's the only thing you can own where we can't make any more of it. So it's for that very reason that it is the most performant asset in human history and will continue to be. And it's simple. It's a straightforward idea, but it's a very profound idea. And that's what I think we're seeing. And that's what we've been seeing since it was invented.
Yeah, that scarcity, there's 21 million outstanding. Okay, how much of this do you think is a combination of what I just talked about, though, these political signals? We got the crypto-friendly SEC nominee, we got this new crypto czar, and Powell's gold comparison. I mean, did this play into the rally?
Listen, I don't consider myself a short-term trader.
Yeah.
I believe in Bitcoin's long-term. Listen, financial markets like certainty. Or another way to put that is they don't like uncertainty. Yeah. So going into one of the most uncertain elections, I think financial markets, there's a lot of capital on the sidelines. It didn't surprise me that Bitcoin didn't want to move until it got a result. Going into the election, remind you, people didn't know if whoever won or lost, if we were going to actually get a final result, if there was going to be marching and protests and revolting, and if anyone was going to concede to being the loser. I think such a landslide victory and such a decisive win for Trump gave the market a lot of certainty, and it acted on that certainty. That is unquestionable. That's just data. That's just math. Now, whether it's Powell or Putin or Trump or new chairmans, I think the story here is Bitcoin is a good idea. What do I mean by that? Having a neutral money accessible to everyone in the world, inclusive where everyone has access, that no one can print, no one can debase, it's infinitely divisible, it's transportable digitally. That's just a good idea. It's a good idea. It's a revolutionary idea. It's an idea that helps all. And that's what I think the story of Bitcoin is. It's helping the US government. It's helping families, individuals, corporations, and Michael Saylor. It's helping Russia. It's helping potentially the Fed. So I think the story here is what Bitcoin's trying to achieve is a good idea. And the measure of its value is it achieving that? And I think it is. It's been 15 years and it continues to do so. So that's the main takeaway. I'm happy to get into any of those subtopics in detail. But to me, Bitcoin's just a really, really good idea that's working.
Yeah, and people are starting to see it. I mean, we'll get into that. But I mean, hours after Bitcoin surpassed that $100,000 mark, your call here, President-elect Donald Trump, who pledged to make the U.S. the crypto capital of the planet and create a strategic Bitcoin reserve, congratulated Bitcoiners on his social media platform, Truth Social. He appeared to take credit for the recent rally, writing, "You're welcome." So, I mean, before we get into that overall macro thought, what are your thoughts on Trump's remarks? And how significant is it that a president-elect openly embraces Bitcoin at this level?
Tremendously significant. Reminds you guys, I'm a 30-year-old American entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. So I'm a millennial entrepreneur in this country, and seeing my president, or president-elect, I should say, voice positive comments and encouragement for my business and those that are building with me in this industry is very encouraging. I love that. I've made public remarks that I don't know if I've ever been more inspired to be an entrepreneur in this country, especially within my age class. I grew up living in currency debasement, living in war, and it feels good to know that the country has my back in trying to build superior monetary technology, not only for my citizens, but for the globe. And I think that's land of the free, home of the brave. So in that respect, it feels good. I think for the rest of America, my position on Bitcoin is Bitcoin's very American. Bitcoin's pro-technology, it's pro-growth, it's inclusive. Bitcoin enforces equal rights for all. There's a freedom in opining. There's a freedom in coming and going. It's a peered network where it's rules with no rulers. These are all American ideals and American values. And I think seeing a president that says we want to be pro-technology, we want to be pro-growth, we want to continue to be the leader of the free world and the leader of innovation. And Bitcoin screams all of those things. So seeing our leader recognize that in a new technology trend, I think should instill confidence in the American people. And then for those that rely on America to continue to lead with its ideals. So I think it's a net positive across the board. I really don't see any downside risk in our president supporting and encouraging new technological trends that have been additive to our species over the last decade plus. Those are my comments and my thoughts.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not just him watching, too. I'd love to get your thoughts on the remarks by Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, who has stated that Bitcoin should be seen more as a competitor to gold rather than a direct rival to the traditional fiat currencies like the U.S. dollar. Let's take a listen to what he said here.
People use Bitcoin as a speculative asset, right? It's like gold. It's just like gold, only it's virtual. It's digital. People are not using it as a form of payment. Or as a store of value. It's highly volatile. It's not a competitor for the dollar. It's really a competitor for gold. That's really how I think of it.
Okay, well, Powell's comments have been interpreted as supportive of Bitcoin's role as digital gold, fueling discussions about its potential to replace physical gold as a primary store of value. Jack, what are your thoughts here?
I think, first of all, this is extremely validating, and it's a huge step for Bitcoin to get acknowledgement from the chair of the biggest central bank in the world, from this Federal Reserve, the US dollar, effectively. I think his comments can be interpreted as this. The size of the market that Bitcoin's going after, I measured on my own calculations, is about $900 trillion. And that's the amount of wealth that's stored in assets. So that's a gold, other precious metals, art collectibles, equities, real estate. It's about $900 trillion worth of wealth. And I think what he's saying is, listen, nobody uses the US dollar as a savings account. Nobody stores their wealth in the US dollar. People use equities, real estate, precious metals, art. These are the assets people have monetized to persist and store their wealth, and Bitcoin is a competitor to that. And I would agree with that. I really, really would. I think Bitcoin is demonetizing these instruments where people are going from owning 10 homes where they only live and consume in one to I might as well just own the one home I actually use and sell my 9 and buy Bitcoin. Because Bitcoin is better at persisting and storing wealth. Bitcoin is outperforming, and your other 9 homes weren't actually intended to be a monetary unit to store value. They were intended for you to live in them. And so I think society has monetized other assets in their life out of desperation to persist and store wealth. And now we've engineered a solution that solves that problem. And what Jerome is saying is, listen, we're still going to have the dollar as a transactional currency in this country. But if people are going to speculate and use Bitcoin to store and persist their wealth as opposed to real estate instead of an index basket of equities, instead of a gold bar, that seems reasonable to me. And in fact, those that have outperformed those that haven't. That's how I interpreted the comments, and I think it's an incredible step for Bitcoin because it's being acknowledged at its biggest stage to $2 trillion asset. And at this point, I think the conversation is how impactful and how important can Bitcoin be as opposed to when is it going to fail? I think we're making that and we're crossing that chasm.
Yeah, I did want to focus on this idea that Powell, while comparing Bitcoin to gold, Powell said that Bitcoin is not a store of value. I mean, why is this huge disconnect in his statement? I mean, why is it there? We had another analyst point this out. Luke Groman, for instance, who is the founder and president of Forest for Trees, posted on X that I quote, "When smart, sophisticated people start saying nonsensical things in their subject of expertise, it's often a signpost of them attempting to rectify hardwired dogma or politics with shifting reality that they see they can't admit yet." So what's your take on Powell's seemingly contradictory stance? I mean, is this the case of central bankers contorting language to fit old frameworks, or is there a deeper hesitation to grant Bitcoin full store of value status?
I think all of the above. I agree with Luke. I mean, listen, I would consider myself more of an expert on Bitcoin than Jerome. Yeah. I think there are millions or tens of millions or potentially hundreds of millions of people that actively disagree with Jerome. I think there's been $2 trillion worth of wealth created in a peaceful, distributed manner over the last 15 years that literally contradict what he just said. Mm-hmm. So I don't really value his opinion and his expertise on Bitcoin. I don't think he's a Bitcoin expert at all. I doubt he owns any. I doubt he's ever used it. I doubt he understands it. I think it's the mere fact that he thinks of it like gold and that there's an idea globally where you cannot store and persist your wealth in fiat currencies. These currencies face inflation. These currencies are actively debased. These currencies' monetary unit is increased. And so you have to go elsewhere if you want to store your time and energy, your effort and your labor, your wealth, your future. And Bitcoin is increasingly the solution for that. And the fact that he thinks of it directionally the same is a monumental step. And anything other than that, I discredit his opinion entirely. And I think the public disagrees with it, and on good merit.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. I mean, to your point, we heard from a Bernstein analyst this week saying that Bitcoin could replace gold over the next decade. This was a quote from Bernstein, and I quote, "We expect Bitcoin to emerge as the new age premier store of value asset, eventually replacing gold over the next decade and becoming a permanent part of the institutional multi-asset allocation and is standard for corporate treasury management." I mean, is it likely that Bitcoin replaces gold as a top store of value within 10 years?
Yes. I agree. I think we might actually see Bitcoin's market cap exceed gold far sooner than 10 years. Listen, it goes back to my fundamental point initially. If we want more gold, if the gold price 10x's, if for whatever reason demand surges, we can get more. Gold is in the ground. Gold is on other planets. Elon told us he's going to go to another planet and get a bunch more gold if we need him to. If we need more Bitcoin, we can't get any more. And again, that speaks to Bitcoin as a money, not a utility. It speaks to its fact you can't debase it. You can't print it. You can't inflate it. And for that very reason, Bitcoin will outperform, and it's the best way to protect your money, your time, your energy, your effort, your labor. It's the best way to store value from today and into the future. On top of that, consider the fact that it's weightless to hold it. On top of that, consider that it's free and instant to transfer it anywhere in the world. On top of that, consider it's way cheaper to verify its authenticity. On top of that, consider the fact that it could be divided into such small units that could measure a grain of sand or measure the size of a sports franchise.
Right.
It is the superior monetary asset and monetary good. The last thing I'll say about gold is this. Listen, the fact that gold has to be concentrated at a central party, like a government, like a bank, like a corporation, to achieve final settlement, to achieve transaction finality, ended up being the reason that gold failed. In order for gold, if we were living in a localized economy with 10 people, gold's perfect. I can go to my local butcher, my local grocer, my local tailor, and I can exchange gold coins. If you want to live in an economy, a global one with 8 billion people on the internet, gold didn't work. Because in order for us to facilitate global digital payments, we had to go give our gold to governments, central banks, and corporations for them to achieve the transaction finality. The one very interesting insight about Bitcoin is it's not only a monetary asset, it's also a monetary network. Bitcoin achieved the impossible, which is transaction finality without a middleman, without a central party. And so it's for that very reason as well that Bitcoin can scale to the economy we live in today without the counterparty risk necessary of a central bank, a corporation, or a government. Is that governments only own 2, 3, 4% of this asset. The rest of this asset is owned by the public and the people, and it's working. And so for all of those reasons, I think Bitcoin is intended and designed and engineered to solve gold's shortcomings. Bitcoin is a man-made asset. It's an engineered asset. The story of humanity is engineering a better world. And I think that's absolutely and literally what Bitcoin is. And for all of those reasons, I think Bitcoin is going to take gold's lunch, for better or worse. I do.
The audience,
I really do.
There's some of our audience will love it, some of them will hate it. But I mean, you know, one of the reasons, and I don't want to make it a Jay Powell show. I feel like we've talked about Jerome enough this year. But one of the reasons why Powell was asked about Bitcoin in the first place was because there's this idea that more and more people are realizing that the Fed, what the Fed is doing when it comes to money printing and dollar debasement. I mean, U.S. national debt crossing $36 trillion is just one clear example of things going very wrong. So, I mean, what are your thoughts here? Are more people becoming critical of the Fed and, you know, this monetary policy?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think every single person on this planet has acknowledged our fiscal situation and the fact that it's a disaster. It's a massive problem. It's probably the most important problem we have, and no one knows how to solve it. Take a second and just sit on that. I'll never forget my Fed chairman getting on 60 Minutes after I was watching LeBron James play basketball and say, we are on an unsustainable path. The US government is going to go bankrupt if somebody doesn't do something. I was like, what planet am I living on? That was real life. And now we're at a point where there's Jamie Dimon, Jerome Powell. It doesn't matter who you ask. The fiscal situation, the deficits are far too gone. We have a massive problem. There's no clear solution. So I think that that's bullish hard assets. I think that's bullish alternative monetary systems. I think that's bullish a digital thing that I can put in my pocket or put in my brain that no one can debase and no one can print. I think that if you look at domestic debt to GDP, if you look at global debt to GDP, whatever metric is your favorite, there's a hole in the balance sheet. There is more borrowed than we've produced growth to pay it back. And the question everyone has to ask is, who's realizing that loss? There's a loss. Someone has to realize it. Which one of us sitting at the table is the loser? And that's what I think everyone's fighting over. That's what policy is about. These are the decisions that are being made at the highest level. And by owning something like Bitcoin, for me, is saying, listen, I don't know what the outcome is going to be. I don't know who they're going to dictate the loser, but it's not going to be me. It's not going to be me. And I can cryptographically and mathematically guarantee you that it's not going to be me. So I'm out. And that's how I think about it. And that's what I think we're living through.
Yeah. I mean, talk to me a little bit about the long-term situation here, because obviously we just saw President Trump talk about BRICS, saying, okay, the U.S. dollar, if any country doesn't want to use the U.S. dollar, they're going to be 100% tariff. But could we genuinely see a change in the monetary system in the U.S.? And more importantly, how quickly could this happen if public sentiment and government policy aligns towards Bitcoin like it's seemingly doing?
Yeah, well, listen, I think we have to remind ourselves, where are the public, like you and I, the government, central banks, where are we generally all on the same team? And that's a weaker dollar, right? The government wants a weaker dollar. Trump has hinted at a weaker dollar. And that's why I think we'll continue to see asset inflation and currency debasement. That's the way out, is if I can debase what I owe. And so that's where I think this goes long term. Does that mean that we enter an entire new monetary system where fiat currencies don't exist? No, I don't believe that. I do not believe that. But do I think we can live in a world where Bitcoin is over $1 million, where gold is up, where the S&P is up? And another way to say that is the dollar is down. I absolutely think not only is that possible, but that's where we are headed. So the loss has to be realized somewhere. I think my message to the public is this. They're realizing the loss for those that are holding and storing and saving in dollars. And hear me out. Traditionally, the way to get out of dollars and persist your wealth elsewhere is invest in Miami beachfront real estate. Invest in the best equities or the best venture capital deals in San Francisco. Not everyone had access to that. Bitcoin is so unique and that you can buy a penny of it. Everyone has access to it. All you got to do is download an app on your phone. And so why I think this is a unique situation where, listen, this isn't the first time ever that we're living through a potential fall of an empire, an inflationary period where currency is actively debased and those holding it are the losers. Yeah. What makes this time unique is that we, the people, have engineered an alternate monetary system that's scarce and accessible to all of us that no one can stop. And so my public comms and a lot of my time and energy is getting the message out there that that's what makes this time different. Not that they're going to do anything different, is that you can do something different. And that something different is protecting yourself by owning something like Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, you just brought up that unsustainable path that you were talking about there. When does it become really unsustainable? I mean, we keep hearing rhetoric around, but where are we at here, Jack?
I honestly believe over the next 12 to 36 months or so, we're going to see drastic changes in monetary policy. Listen, we need Trump to get in office and we need to understand what his plan is. But he's even hinted at having some oversight and control over the Federal Reserve. Is it beyond us that the way Trump sees himself taming inflation, controlling financial markets while allowing the S&P and assets to rise in the greater interest of the people? Maybe he wants Bessent to be the Fed chairman and lead the Treasury. Is that beyond us? Is Trump going to exercise his right to have further oversight over the Fed? Would that imply and mean that Trump is going to use some form of yield curve control to exercise absolute control at both ends of the market and make sure that assets pump and inflation is relatively tamed at the expense of those that hold the dollar? Is that what he means by weaker dollar and strengthening our exports? These are all very open questions, but I think it's very clear that this new administration means business. They mean change. I think a lot of the things, if we can't possibly question the Fed's independence, well, it turns out this administration can. We can't possibly question cutting government divisions and reducing expenses. Well, this administration can. So I think there's extreme change coming. And I think on net, it's for the good. But in the short to near term, it's going to be extremely volatile and it's going to be extremely weakening for the dollar. So my expectation is own hard assets. I think Bitcoin's going to 250,000 to $1 million within the next 12 to 18 months or so.
Wow. Okay.
And that's what the last thing I'll say is I do think markets are trying to figure this out. The funny thing about the United States of America, which makes one of the things that makes our elections unique, is that we elect someone and then they don't get to start yet. So we elect someone and then everyone has to speculate what they're actually going to do before they do it. And so it is a strange time. You've got holidays and you've got a president-elect that's out there tweeting and assigning people positions and responsibilities and roles, but we don't actually know what he's going to do. But I do predict over the next few years, a significant amount of change, a significantly weaker dollar, and a significantly stronger Bitcoin.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of speculation. I call it the in-between, the weird bit where we're just waiting. But another major development is that President-elect Donald Trump's pick of respected Washington lawyer Paul Atkins to lead the SEC, or the Securities and Exchange Commission. I mean, he's viewed obviously as far more crypto-friendly than Gary Gensler. And even if it might not affect Bitcoin's core value proposition directly, a friendlier regulatory environment could lower some hurdles for investors and institutions. So how significant is this development? And do you think that it's going to, create some price movement here?
Sure, probably. Again, investors like certainty.
Yeah.
Right. And if the certainty they're getting is that regulation is going to be pro-technology and that you are comfortable either investing in technology, investing in the assets that this technology represents, investors are going to like that. Myself personally, I'm a Bitcoin only guy. For those that don't know, I've been in Bitcoin for 12 years. So I was around before all these alternative cryptos ever existed. I still, to this day, I don't understand the value. I don't think they're anything like Bitcoin. I don't think they're money whatsoever. So I don't think they should be compared to Bitcoin or gold or any monetary instruments whatsoever. I think of them more like technologies that are still trying to find a problem and a use case to solve. So I actually don't have that much interest in the literal policy that's going to be supporting the crypto industry at large. My business is strictly Bitcoin, and we've had regulatory clarity and support from day one. And so it won't change my business and my outlook on Bitcoin much, but I do think the general trend that the new administration in the United States wants to be pro-technology, we want to be pro-innovation, we want the founders and the new growth and the new developments to be here in this country as it always has been. I think that's positive, and markets and finance, people are going to love that. And I think it's bullish and things are going to trade higher because of it.
Okay, so you think that there's an end to this Operation Choke Point 2.0 under Trump here?
Yes. I mean, I lived through that. I was debanked many times. We had to find a new bank account as a company in an order of days. So we've seen with time things get better, and especially post-election, it's been a bit of night and day. So I do think the Operation Choke Point will sunset, and really my expectation is that we'll get transparency and clarity into what happened. That's really my only hope outside of just general support from the government and regulators, is that we want to know why what happened, because on net as humans, we just want to be better and not repeat mistakes. But that was a crazy time, but I think it's behind us at this point.
Okay, good to hear. I mean, a lot of transparency with these new picks. We even heard from Russian President Vladimir Putin on the topic of Bitcoin. Everyone's talking about it, Jack. He was speaking at the VTB Forum event called Russia Calling. Putin described Bitcoin as unstoppable, calling the cryptocurrency the future of global finance as nations move away from the declining U.S. dollar dominance. Let's take a quick peek and listen to the clip here.
Биткоин кто может запретить? Никто. А использование других электронных средств расчета кто может запретить? Никто, потому что это новые технологии. И чего бы ни было, чего бы ни происходило с долларом, эти инструменты так или иначе будут развиваться, потому что все будут стремиться к тому, чтобы снижать издержки и повышать надежность.
No one can stop it, he says. Okay, so Jack, how pivotal is this moment in time? And are we seeing any new signs of sovereigns buying Bitcoin?
I think we are. I do think that this is the era where sovereigns will be adding Bitcoin as an asset that they hold and accumulate in value. On the Putin comments, to me, this is the biggest story. And let me add commentary there to be extremely clear what I mean by that. This exemplifies exactly what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin does not care about politics. It does not care about government. It doesn't care about geography. It doesn't care about anything. It is a neutral monetary asset. And if money is our time and energy in an abstracted form, It's the market good that we use to store and then later exchange for the goods and services we need as humans. And we want to live in an economy, in a society of billions of people on the internet. We need a neutral money. And so it's the mere fact that you could have opposing governments, opposing people, opposing companies that disagree with each other on all other things, but find value in this one monetary instrument is one of the core value propositions of Bitcoin. And so I think it is, I mean, for being in Bitcoin for 12 years, it's almost unbelievable to see the head of nation states acknowledge the fact that this is something that no one can sanction you off of, that no one can pry from you, that is valuable, scarce. He referenced that it's technology, by the way, that will continually improve. That's one big difference between Bitcoin and gold, is Bitcoin will get better forever because it's technology. Bitcoin will continue to get better long after I'm gone because it's software. Gold can't. We didn't make gold. We found gold. We made Bitcoin. And so the fact that this is being acknowledged globally, I think begins the transition of the world migrating towards a neutral digital store of wealth and new reserve currency for the world. And so to me, that's the profound takeaway from his comments, and just how profound it is. I don't think the market has truly absorbed that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we've been watching central banks from across the world be picking up gold at record rates all this year. I think we just had a recent report from the World Gold Council talking about how they've been really picking up in the month of October. So let's talk about this. I mean, will this become a race for countries to buy Bitcoin? And how soon, can we start seeing it? I mean, is there already some countries buying in secret?
Yeah, well, I think we got to give credit to El Salvador.
Yeah.
I know it's a smaller country, but they've been buying Bitcoin for years. I was there and helped advise the government and the country through that transition to being a Bitcoin country. And let's acknowledge the fact that it worked. Their relationship with the IMF is better. The way that the outside world assesses their creditworthiness is better. GDP is up. Domestic business is up. I mean, it's transformed that country in more ways than one. So first of all, whenever I get asked the question, when are countries going to start buying Bitcoin, I have to acknowledge El Salvador. They were the first. Other than that, listen, I think the United States and Trump and the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve is a huge deal. Now, are other sovereigns and countries front running them? Maybe. It's totally possible. But I think all eyes are on the United States. All eyes are on Donald Trump. And I think the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve and the United States buying Bitcoin is such a net positive. It'd be such a big deal. So I think we're going to learn a lot over the next few months, and it would not surprise me if other countries and other sovereigns are front running the United States of America, especially for an asset as scarce as Bitcoin.
Yeah, well, you and I are going to talk about Cynthia Lummis, the Wyoming senator's proposal here in a moment. But before we do, we just got some recent U.S. jobs data out from November. Payrolls rose by 227,000. Encouraging headline at first glance. But if you dig deeper, unemployment nudged higher. The participation rate slipped, and real wage growth is still lagging inflation. The October number that shocked on the downside was revised slightly higher to 36,000. We have the latest Federal Reserve meeting coming up on December 18th. The CME FedWatch tool pricing in an 85% chance of another 25 basis point rate cut this year. I got to ask you, Jack, looking at it, what's your macro outlook going into next year?
I think the story remains the same. Within the U.S., we really have two economies.
Yeah.
The wealth is concentrated within the boomer class. These elderlies are the ones that own all the assets, that have benefited from the asset inflation. Also, by the way, not to be blunt, but they're on their way to dying at this point, and they're looking to spend money. Travel and airline bookings and the amount of customers that TSA is processing in airports is at all-time highs. What does that tell you? The economy's booming. People are traveling. They're enjoying their life. They're spending money. And whether it's on themselves, maybe they're flying their kids out. Then you have millennials, Gen Z, my age group. This age group has had to bid for housing, for real estate against boomers. Who do you think is going to win in a bidding war? Someone that's 20 years old that's worked for 6 months, or someone that's 60 years old that's worked for 40 years? They're going to bid a premium and buy the house. And so here you have a wealth group and a class of people that own no assets, that have not benefited from asset inflation. In fact, inflation has destroyed them. unbelievable record amounts of debt. You're starting to see unemployment. You're seeing a lot of civil unrest and weakness in the younger class. And so I think we're living through two economies. In one respect, the US economy is absolutely booming. And how is it, listen, I think government is like 30-40% of our GDP or something. So how is that economy not going to be booming and strong? So when Powell says the economy is strong, he's not wrong. But I think we're living in two dual economies. So in any event, the story remains the same for me. This path is not sustainable. That's why the data, though, is confusing, is because depending on who you ask, this financial situation and temperature is okay. And I do believe that no matter what, currency debasement is the only way out. It's the only way to realize the loss.
Do you think the Fed's going to keep cutting into next year? Do you think we'll see that 25 basis points and then next year they're just going to keep this going?
I do. Yeah. And listen, what that tells me, Jerome should have never started to cut. Why? Because he set a goal, 2% inflation. He didn't hit it. And I think that tells all of us that we're living in fiscal dominance, where the Treasury and the government is in charge. The most important thing is financing the government, is making sure that this debt doesn't collapse on itself and that the government doesn't fail and the United States doesn't fail at large. Jerome's goals don't matter, clearly. Because if Jerome was able to prioritize his own goals and be a man of his word, he wouldn't have cut. He would have kept rates high until he hit his goal, but he didn't. And that tells you everything you need to know. He's not in charge. We're living in fiscal dominance. The US Treasury is the most important position in the world. And he's going to continue to cut because the US interest payments, we can't afford them. And so that's the reality of the situation. And I think the world will increasingly try to bail out the United States of America. And the only way to do that is to weaken the dollar and juice assets. Yeah, and so I absolutely do think this path will continue. And if anything, it'll get more aggressive.
Okay. So what are these major risks that you're watching for next year? I mean, specifically, is the market underpricing any of these risks right now?
Yeah, I think it's underpricing Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, I think a lot of the market is under the same impression I am. Have you heard a Larry Fink interview recently?
Which one?
I don't think it matters.
Yeah,
Point being, it's pretty clear. Listen, I think the 60-40 portfolio is being questioned. I think everyone understands that holding these long duration instruments, a lot of these bonds, they're the suckers at the table. They're getting crushed. And if you want to actually persist your wealth in real terms, these things aren't working. What about Michael Saylor? Look at the instruments he's issuing. He's oversubscribed to the tune of billions of dollars, it feels like every other day, of Bitcoin bonds. And instead of debating the value of that product, you ever heard the age-old, if you don't have a problem, no need to fix anything, right? Well, these people are clearly trying to fix something. What are they trying to fix? So I think the financial market is actually realizing reality and is on its way to transitioning. You've got Larry Fink, his most successful product to date. And the reason he's making headlines is because he's selling an exit. Yeah. So in my opinion, markets are beginning to price this. That's why Bitcoin is at 100,000. That's why gold is at or around all-time highs. It's seen the most price action it has in decades. So I think we are pricing this in. We're beginning to. I do think things are severely underpriced, but it's not my opinion that we're going to wake up and the world's going to be entirely different. I do think gradually, then suddenly, and markets are starting to realize what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, with this bubble, the S&P going to just continue to keep rolling too, or do you think the asset class, just Bitcoin, is what's going to be taking the pie here?
The S&P has to. So to be clear, I think we're going to live through the biggest asset bubble in human history because we have to. I think the amount of money printing will exceed COVID. And this is all just math. I'm doing this based on deficits and the debt that's out there and the level of money printing that needs to happen for systems to remain solvent. But all assets will go up. My point remains the same in that Bitcoin will go up the most. It will be the most performant again. But the S&P will go up as well. And it's also really important. The S&P 500 is the American savings account. That's what it has become. So not only do I think it will go up, it has to go up. The US government cannot afford the S&P to crash because it holds and stores the wealth of the American people. And so I think the S&P 500 has to go up. I think actions on behalf of both the Treasury and the Federal Reserve have been pretty deliberate in that. And so I expect it to be part of this giant asset bubble over the next few years. And, really over the next decade, but things come and go over the next few years.
So next few years, maybe next decade, nothing we have to worry about in the next year or two. I mean, we can still keep taking profits. Is that kind of the scope here?
I mean, for me personally, and all I can do is speak for myself, take profits into what?
Yeah.
I don't sell Bitcoin because what do I want, dollars?
Yeah.
So, the way I live my life is I have my house, I own my business, and then I own Bitcoins. And if there's a hard asset or something that I need to consume in my life, of course I acquire it. But I have no interest in being long dollars anytime soon, if ever again.
Yeah.
So I don't think that this is a profit-taking time. I think this is a time to acquire and lean into assets. I think this is going to be the biggest asset bubble in human history. And I would not want to pay the tax of inflation over the next few years.
Yeah, certainly one that a lot of people are accountable for. Okay, let's talk about this concept of a Bitcoin as a reserve asset again, because you mentioned that you no longer own any U.S. dollars, so you basically opted out of the system. What have you seen happen to people's dollar savings accounts in the last few decades? And, how have you opted out of this system that you're talking about?
Yeah, I think it's very simple. To dumb it down in basic terms for the general public, when you live your life on dollars, your life gets more expensive, period. Housing gets more expensive, groceries get more expensive, gas gets more expensive. And that's both in the short term, what we've seen over the last few years, and over the last century. In other words, the purchasing power of the dollar has done nothing but go down. And the reason for that is because you can print infinite amounts of it, it can be debased, and the assets that you need to buy with it get inflated in price. Now, Bitcoin is quite literally the opposite. In its history, all it's done over time is go up. It cannot be printed, therefore it cannot be debased. And in fact, instead of the goods and services that you need to buy going up, it actually goes down in price. So housing price in Bitcoin has gotten cheaper. Groceries in Bitcoin has gotten cheaper. Gas in Bitcoin has gotten cheaper. And so I think Bitcoin as a reserve asset to store your capital is a winner. It's obviously better than fiat currency. And so what I did personally is I asked myself the question, how can I live a life without inflation? If there is a money that only goes down, why do I own any of it? It was really first principle thinking. If the dollar only goes down over time, why do I own any? And if Bitcoin only goes up over time, why don't I own as much as I can? Mm-hmm. And that's what I did. I got rid of all my dollars. I own only Bitcoin. And thankfully, I also run a company that builds the best software in the world for this technology. And so we built tools to allow customers to live only on Bitcoin, get their paychecks in Bitcoin, pay their bills with Bitcoin, and live a life without needing to be reliant on fiat at all. And so the last thing, the data speaks for itself. It's pretty funny. Since I started this, Bitcoin's up over 100% over this long duration. And over 100% means Bitcoin's more than doubled by a little bit. And another way to think about that in purchasing power terms is everything in my life has gotten half off. Yeah. And it's amazing. I still spend on my credit cards. I've got an Amex, I've got a Chase Sapphire, I've got an Apple card, and I shop wherever I want. I do whatever I want. I take my girlfriend out to nice dinners. But because of the money that I'm using as my reserve asset in my life's gotten half off instead of everything around me doubling in price. And so it's that subtle change, it's that subtle insight that we're unlocking for our customers and I've unlocked for myself.
Yeah, well said. Okay, well then let's jump into your 2025 price outlook, because you said, $250 to $1 million for 2025. That would gain a lot more purchasing power to your wallet there, Jack. Why is the range so wide?
Because I'm being asked to speculate and price something in dollars that the government is actively debasing and printing. If you wanted me to price Bitcoin in houses or in gold bars, I would give you a tighter range. But these worthless pieces of paper that they keep printing, it's difficult for me to predict. I think the high level, though, is listen, if we come out and we see the U.S. government build a Bitcoin strategic reserve and say this asset is important, it's meaningful, it's technology, it's growth, and it's actually strong America, and it's going to give the world confidence in the future of this country and our future promises, which I consider our debt, then I think you can easily see $1 million Bitcoin. Even with the pressures against Bitcoin that we've seen in Operation Choke Points and in poor regulation, I still think Bitcoin would hit 250,000. Mind you, these were predictions before the election. These are not updated predictions. So I think Bitcoin has this cyclical behavior around halvings where it goes through supply shock, it goes into price discovery. And I think 250,000 on the low side over the next year, and on the high side where this administration is bullish, it's pro-Bitcoin, it's supportive, and it's actually becoming a holder of the asset. I think $1 million is more than reasonable.
Interesting. So does this mean more spending and more debt? Is that what's going to get the price here, or it's more on fundamentals at this point?
Well, Senator Lummis's bill to me is fascinating. It's taking excess reserves from the Fed banks, primarily in gold, and building a Bitcoin position with them. And I think that that is a tremendous idea. It's really about diversifying out of the old and acquiring and leading in the new. Think about how the United States was built as a country. We acquired Alaska. We acquired California. We bought Manhattan. The Louisiana Purchase. A lot of this was buying the new, buying where the world was going, buying what people wanted in the future. And the age-old travel west, where to, Western man? Yeah. Well, we've acquired the West. We own the physical West. What about the digital West? Where digitally is there freedom, equal rights, freedom of speech, inclusion, equality? That's Bitcoin. And so I think it'd be very American of us to go into our excess reserves and diversify a little bit out of the old and start acquiring the new, just as we did long ago. That's how I think about Senator Lummis's bill. And to me, that's a pretty clear plan of how we build the position. It's not threatening to the dollar in any sense. It's not hyperinflating against the dollar necessarily. And I really like her proposal, and I'm a big believer and supporter of it.
Interesting. Okay, so supporter of it, because obviously she proposes converting part of the U.S. vast gold reserves, over 8,000 tons, into Bitcoin, selling that gold. This goes far beyond President-elect Trump's original idea involving the 200,000 seized Bitcoin. Lummis, as you just said, wants to gradually acquire 1 million Bitcoin over 20 years, about 5% of this total supply. So, is this scenario even feasible? I know that it's seeing some eyeballs right now, but do you see this actually coming to fruition?
Absolutely. I'd ask why not.
Yeah.
Listen, I think the story for the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve to me is this. If the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve is signed and put in place, I think this would be the biggest U.S. economic announcement since Nixon in 71. What do I mean by that? Well, the U.S. made an economic announcement in 1933. What was it? We're taking all your stuff. The U.S. made an economic announcement in 71. What was it? We're divorcing ourselves from the gold standard so we can print money and inflate your life away. The U.S. made an economic announcement in 08. What was it? We're bailing out poor behavior and we're taking the side of the banks. If the U.S. makes an economic announcement in 2025, what is it? We're pro-growth. We're pro-technology. We're pro-innovation. We realize we have a deficit problem and a debt problem. We want to back our future promises with the future, with the fastest growing asset. We want to give confidence to the people that we acknowledge the problem and we're building towards it. This is, again, in line with, this acts in the best interest of the public. It's not we're taking your stuff. It's not we're debasing your stuff. It's not we're taking the side of the banks. The large supply of this asset is owned by the general public. This is a move that acts in the best interest of the people. This is a move that acts in best interest of business. This is pro-business. This is pro-labor. This is pro-energy. So this pro-industry. So I think this is on par with something like 71 and Nixon, but it's positive. It's not negative.
Interesting. So how soon does it happen, Jack? We had some analysts on telling us early next year.
I think that's possible. Absolutely. This goes into just general government process in the United States of America, the difference between an executive order and a bill that has to be passed through Congress. But I think the United States could be buying Bitcoin as soon as Q1 of next year. There are many facets and avenues in which they can exercise that opportunity. And it comes down to the leadership of President Trump and this new administration. So we'll see what they want and where their interests lie. But I do expect them to be pro-Bitcoin because Bitcoin is beneficial to them. The one thing about Bitcoin that I think people don't generally appreciate is the game theory. Historically, you're much better on Bitcoin's team than trying to fight against it. And that's very important, is that the United States is much better off benefiting from this technology in various ways than trying to stand in its way. So I do expect this new administration to continue to be pro-Bitcoin and buy some because it's in their best interest to do so.
So is that what's going to take Bitcoin to $1 million if that starts happening? If these analysts, and you're correct, and it starts happening early next year?
Yeah, it very well could. Absolutely. I mean, my predictions, again, are grounded in the fundamentals. You can't print any more of this thing. So the more demand and the more people that want it, the price has to go up. And I think the price is justified to go up because it's better at storing wealth and protecting your future than all other financial assets or just general assets you can own, like real estate or a basket of equities. So yeah, absolutely. You can consider my prediction as simple as this. I think there will be more demand next year for Bitcoin than there is right now. And I think that demand will take it way higher. $1 million's not impossible.
Yeah, Jackie, we've been talking all about these hypotheticals the entire show, but I mean, we know that there's a lot of unknowns. Give me and the audience, the top 3 key developments for Bitcoin that you're watching very closely for this upcoming year.
I think the ETF was massive. I think the approval of the ETF was a big deal. So I think further clarity on how banks can get involved, SAB 121. I think this industry is really looking forward to that. And I think there's a lot of non-existent participants that want to actually serve customers and participate in the space today. And I think these are large financial institutions and banks, very similar to the ETFs and how we were getting rejection after rejection after rejection. And we saw an onslaught of demand and new business once we saw approvals. So I think that's a very, 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 very big one. I think the story of corporations like MicroStrategy using Bitcoin as a reserve asset is a massive development. And then I think the way I think about Bitcoin is Bitcoin equals technology plus fiat liquidity. We talk a lot about the fiat liquidity piece, right? I think Bitcoin is the best expression of currency debasement. So as we print money, Bitcoin is going to go up. It's going to go up the most more than anything else. But the technology piece, technology plus currency debasement. So the technology piece is fascinating. When we have things like the Lightning Network, we have companies like mine that are continuing to make this thing more accessible and more valuable to people all over the world. So I think that's the piece where, listen, we can't make gold any better. It is what it is. It's a collection of atoms and chemicals that Mother Nature made. We can't make Bitcoin better. And how do you price that technology and that future growth and value and disruption to existing industries? So I would say the combination of those 3 is what continues to make me really excited and why I think 2025 is going to be a big deal.
Crazy, man. And so these AI companies and some of these bigger tech companies, I mean, we're going to start seeing some Bitcoin on the balance sheets too?
Well, I think they should. What I think people don't talk about enough is, I'm really big Saylor bull. I think what he's done for MicroStrategy is genius and incredible. Here's what I don't think people understand. Let's say Microsoft bought a little bit of Bitcoin, but enough to maybe even own more than MicroStrategy. That's how much cash they've got. That's how big they are. I don't think their stock would be more appealing to the customers Saylor serves than MicroStrategy. Why? What Saylor's selling you is 150%, 200% exposure to Bitcoin. He's selling you levered Bitcoin. He's selling you overexposed, hyper volatile Bitcoin in the sense that when Bitcoin goes up, MicroStrategy goes up even more. If Microsoft buys a little bit of Bitcoin, their stock is going to be 2% Bitcoin, 98% Microsoft operating company. And yes, that to me is a more interesting stock than it is today. That to me is a more performant stock than the one today. That to me is a more capitalized stock for the future than it is today. But is that a MicroStrategy competitor? I don't think so. So what's unique about Michael Saylor is he had an operating company that he thought was going to fail, that he thought was going to be worth 0. So he was willing to bet the house. Microsoft, Facebook, Google, these companies are not going to bet the house. They don't need to. They have successful operating companies. And so I think Saylor has won a market of his own. I think he has a massive first mover advantage. I don't see anyone directly competing with the products that he offers. What I do think is he's caved away for others to follow, and that, hey, owning Bitcoin on your balance sheet is acceptable. The public markets actually understand it. They value it. They're not going to short sell and leave you for it. And this is the most performant thing. It has gotten clear regulation. So I think he's paved that path. I think we'll see more companies buy in, but I don't expect MicroStrategy to have any real competitors because the product they're selling is so unique. And even a Facebook or a Google can't compete with him in that way without cannibalizing what they have.
Yeah. CEOs, they're certainly talking about it in the boardrooms, I'm sure, my friend. Jack Mallers is the founder and CEO of Strike, the global Bitcoin app revolutioning financial payments. Hey, thanks for this, Jack. Appreciate it. Great outlook next year. We're going to have you on, and you can, hopefully you were just as accurate as that $100,000 call.
I try, man. You guys are the best. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, bud. Appreciate it. Thanks, Jack. Jack Mullers is the founder and the CEO of Strike, the global Bitcoin app revolutionizing financial payments. We'd also like to thank our Outlook 2025 sponsor, Matador Network, your gateway to the digital future of finance. Discover more at matador.network. I'm Jeremy Szafron. For all of us here at Kitco News, thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you next time.
Kitco News Outlook 2025 is brought to you by Matador.